James Weller, the Boxing Source, here with another video. And this video here is to talk about Callum Smith, the Ring Magazine super middleweight champion that has an upcoming fight against John Ryder. John Ryder is 28-4 with 16 knockouts and is the WBA mandatory challenger to Callum Smith's super championship that he holds with the WBA. This fight is coming up this weekend, and it is the next challenge that Callum Smith has before he could go ahead and look at the other challenges that are out there in the super middleweight division. You do have those multitude of champions that are out there at super middleweight, which includes Billy Joe Saunders that holds the WBO title, that includes Caleb Plant that holds the IBF championship, and that also includes David Benavidez that holds the WBC super middleweight championships. But also, you do have potentially on the horizon a fight between Callum Smith and Canelo Alvarez, who holds the regular championship at super middleweight, when Canelo Alvarez was able to win that particular belt back in December of last year. He was able to do that by going into Madison Square Garden, holding a fight there at Madison Square Garden, and defeating Rocky Fielding for that WBA super middleweight championship. But you've had Callum Smith there holding that super championship for the WBA and waiting for one of those big fights there at super middleweight. He's only had one match here in 2019 where he fought Hassan Ndam over in Madison Square Garden in June, and hasn't really had much of anything since. He's been talked about as potentially having a unification fight with Billy Joe Saunders, but nothing that really came into fruition from that. But now, with him having his mandatory defense coming up against John Ryder, that would open him up to having fights against the other champions in the super middleweight division, or potentially a fight between him and Canelo Alvarez, or him and Gennady Golovkin. That is also there in the middleweight division. But for those that know my previous history, I've said it for the longest time that Gennady Golovkin is not really going to move up to super middleweight, and if he does, I would be extremely shocked. Callum Smith, in his article that's on Ring Magazine, said that he wants the big fights, the big names, the exciting fights that motivate him. He's always said that people will be able to see the best of him when he's in against the best in his weight category, whether it's against one of the other champions or Canelo or Golovkin. He's checked that box of becoming the world champion, so now it's about being involved in the massive fights. So he's saying that he's not looking past John Ryder, but a win would open up massive doors for him in 2020. And not only will people get to see how good he is, but he gets to prove to himself how good he is. And he doesn't feel that he's shown his full abilities just yet. He's, out there just trying to, prove himself against the best of the particular division. Yes, he has won the World Boxing Super Series in the super middleweight division, but you've had a multitude of fighters that are out there at super middleweight that weren't necessarily involved in the World Boxing Super Series. So he wants to prove himself against those other super middleweights at the very least, that he is the better man in that particular division, and that he wants to validate himself as the Ring Magazine super middleweight champion. So he does have this fight against John Ryder coming up, but after that, he wants to have a big fight against one of those super middleweights or against Canelo Alvarez, with him being a potential candidate as an opponent for Canelo Alvarez in May of 2020. So be on the lookout to seeing Callum Smith in action against John Ryder, defending that WBA super title there at super middleweight against his mandatory challenger. And if he gets the win there against John Ryder, then he will look forward to 2020, where he hopes to land a big fight with one of the other world champions there at super middleweight or against Canelo Alvarez. That's what I got in reference to this particular topic. You can subscribe to the Boxing Source here on YouTube, or listen to the Boxing Source radio show live Sundays at 7:30 p.m. Eastern on Blog Talk Radio, or subscribe to the podcast using whatever your favorite podcast app is. On that note, folks, I'm out. Peace.